So, if you were a guest with us today, our theme for the year is called Rooted in Christ, and that comes from Colossians 2, 6, and 7. And let's just, we haven't said this together for a while, so let's review it, and would you just repeat with me? So then, just as you receive Christ Jesus as the Lord, continue to live in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thanksgiving. And today we're going to look at what it means to be rooted in Jesus, who is the gate. Now, if you're going to fully understand today's message, we need to first remind ourselves of what happened immediately previous to this in the Gospel of John in chapter 9. And we learned all about this last weekend, that in that passage, Jesus declared himself to be the light of the world. And then he healed a man who had been blind since birth. And that was no one had ever done that before. But the problem was it happened on the Sabbath, and the religious leaders had all kinds of ridiculous rules about what could or could not be done on the Sabbath, and basically you couldn't do anything that they said was work on the Sabbath, and they thought that healing someone, even healing a man who'd been blind since birth, was work. And so they got their religious noses bent all out of shape, they got themselves in a snit, and they began to interrogate this poor man who could now see. They tried to manipulate him and intimidate him into saying that this Jesus who healed him was a sinner, but he wouldn't do it. And ultimately, they excommunicated him from the synagogue, which was a terrible thing to have happen to you, because it meant that you were cut off from the community, from your friends, from your family, from your business associates. It was virtually impossible to get along that way. And in the process, however, the blind man, who had now been given his physical sight, was also given by the Holy Spirit new spiritual vision. That is, he was able to see the truth of what was going on from his heart. And he was able to see that Jesus, by faith, was the Messiah, that he was the Son of God. And his spiritual vision stood then in stark contrast to the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees, whose lives, Jesus revealed, were tragically rooted in spiritual darkness. So the words and the actions of the Pharisees, who prided themselves in being the only true teachers and leaders of the people, ultimately revealed themselves to be false teachers and blind guides. And so Jesus took the opportunity then, in the presence of the crowds and of the blind man and of the Pharisees, to drive home his point. And he began to draw from images of one of the most common occupations in all of Judea, that of shepherding. And in doing so, he painted the Pharisees as thieves and robbers who were unfaithful shepherds to the people. Now, Judea was largely a pastoral rather than an agricultural region. That is, the land was hilly, it was somewhat arid, and it was rocky. And so it was much more suitable to raising sheep than it was growing crops. And the thing about sheep was this: they are animals that need almost constant supervision, or they tend to get themselves in all kinds of trouble. And Jesus was making the point that people are like sheep, that we need good and faithful shepherding lest we get ourselves into all kinds of trouble. And this is what happens to my wife if I'm not there to shepherd her, if I'm not there to supervise her. So we've got just a little clip for you. This is from the Children's Museum in Minneapolis, and obviously I was not there to speak good sense into her. Maybe. Mike, thank you. We had trouble with this loading last night. It was sideways, but it's still communicating.
Yay, Noah! Okay, here comes Grandma.
This is what happens when I'm not there, right? And I know that if I would go to the Children's Museum in Minneapolis and go to the top of the slide, I know that there's a big sign there that says, for children only, right? But not for her. So, I mean, it's just amazing she didn't break her hip at her age. Forgive me, Lord. So, Jesus was illustrating that people are spiritual sheep, that we tend to wander away and get ourselves lost, that we can be stubborn and rebellious, that we tend to get ourselves into all kinds of trouble, that we get easily hurt, that we are largely defenseless and therefore easily attacked, that we are not terribly bright, and that we tend to die easily. I have a friend, acquaintance Ken Davis, who's a Christian communicator and author, speaker, and he grew up in northern Minnesota on a farm, and his dad had some livestock, and when Ken was a little boy, he did what a lot of young men did on farms. He helped with the chores, and one of the things that he hated the most was taking care of his dad's sheep named Herman. And Herman was rather aggressive, and he had a deal, he had a thing for Ken. And if Ken turned his back on Herman, Herman was likely to get a running start and then butt him. And so Ken was out one day, and he had brought some water out to the trough and some feed out to there, and he was just about done, and he saw Herman, and Herman had caught sight of him, and Herman was coming on a run. And so Ken went, and he stood behind the barn, around the corner of the barn, and he'd kind of peek out, and he'd see Herman coming, and he'd kind of go like this, and then just as Herman was just about to the corner, Ken jumped out, and he went, "Rah!" And Herman, no kidding, staggered back and fell over and died. No kidding. No kidding. Now, you can just imagine Ken's father. What happened to Herman? Right? And trying to explain that. Now, when Jesus began to use metaphors of sheep and shepherds, everyone understood the word pictures that Jesus was painting for them. And in addition, his listeners knew that their scriptures spoke about God's people as sheep and God as the shepherd. And so, for example, in Psalm 23, it starts out, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And Psalm 100, "We are God's people, the sheep of his pasture." And in Isaiah 40, the prophet talked about the coming of the Messiah. He had a vision about what the Messiah would be like, and he said that the Messiah would lead his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and will gently lead those who are with young. Isn't that beautiful? And in our story today in John 10, Jesus identifies himself as the good shepherd. So now you are going to learn that he also identifies himself as the gate. And now you have some context and some background for our text today. And so we're going to look at this amazing teaching, and we're going to find some wonderful promises for God's sheep. That's us, some wonderful promises for us. So Jesus said in verse 7 and 8, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. And all who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them." And Jesus was referencing a well-known image of a sheepfold from the life of a shepherd. And so a sheepfold was simply a walled-in area where a shepherd could bring his sheep for the night, where they could be somewhat safe from wild animals and from robbers and thieves. And sometimes near villages or cities, there were large communal sheepfolds. And so more than one shepherd could bring multiple flocks into the sheepfold, and they'd be safe at night. And there was an entrance to the sheepfold with a door or a gate, with a gatekeeper who gave access to the different shepherds who wanted to come in and out with their sheep. Now, the gate provided the way in and out of safety. It was for safety and for security for the flock. And it kept thieves and robbers and wild animals from gaining access to the sheep. And so what we know is that Jesus is saying that he is the gate of protection. Jesus is not only the good shepherd, but he's the gate to the sheep in the sheepfold. and he desires to protect us. And so how does he do that? Well, he does that in many, many different ways. But one of the ways that he does this, one of the primary ways that he desires to protect the flock, is that he entrusts his sheep into the spiritual care of under-shepherds. That is, spiritual leaders, both lay and clergy, both volunteer and staff, who are called shepherds. Sometimes they're called pastors. And they can be, anyone can be a pastor. Anyone can be a shepherd. Now, not everyone can be an ordained pastor, but if God has given you a pastoral heart, a pastor's heart, a gifting, then you can help shepherd the flock. And these earthly shepherds then are granted access to God's sheep through Jesus, who is the gate. And these under-shepherds find their own security, their own wisdom, their own strength, their own wisdom in the good shepherd, who then gives them the responsibility to shepherd the flock. Now, at the time of Jesus, sheep were raised mainly for their wool rather than as food. And so shepherds often spent decades with their flocks, and they would get to know individual sheep, and they would get to know their personalities and their habits and their characteristics, and they oftentimes then gave them names that were descriptive of each sheep, like brown leg or black ear. And every sheep was special and unique and therefore had its own name. Now, the reason I say this is that in a larger congregation, it's really important for some members of our church family to be identified as with pastoral hearts, and for them to learn to take initiative to learn the names of the people in our congregation, in our flock. And I can't tell you how challenging that is for us pastors as we greet you in the lobby on Sundays. And, sometimes a name comes easily, and other times I've known someone for a long time, and I just go blank. And sometimes, I'll say to Danny, "Hey, how you doing today, Bob?" And I know then I'm in trouble when I get the blank stare. But it's really impossible for everyone in our church to be known by us. And it's impossible for all of you to know everybody in the church. But here's what's true. It is possible for all of us to know somebody. And it's possible for everyone in our church to know someone else and to be known by someone else. And so what I'd love is, we're kind of creatures of habit like sheep are. And so you guys, you're kind of always over here. Okay, there's Derek and Veronica. They're always there. There's you guys. There's, there you are. There you are. There you are. And so here's what I would love is that you would just begin to kind of take responsibility for your area. There's no reason why you can't know everybody in the 3 or 4 rows around you. And when someone comes and sits in your seat, you're graciously say, "Welcome, you must be new. You're in my seat." No, you don't say that. But you say, "I don't believe I know you." And you introduce yourself and you try to remember the name. And you guys are so gracious to us. Some of you, I've asked your names so many times. And I just met this morning for the 100th time. I don't know. Mark? Where's Mark? Mark and Marcy? Yeah. So I'm trying to remember their names again now, okay? So help us with that, if you would. Now, why is that so important? Well, let me give you an example. And I've told you this before, but there was this young man who was in a youth group. He'd been to retreats, he'd been to Bible studies, and he finally was converted to Christ. And his youth director sat down with him and said, "So tell me, what was maybe the most important part of you coming to faith?" And without blinking an eye, he said, "The most important moment in my conversion was the day that you remembered my name." True. Because when we're called by name, we're valued, aren't we? And we feel included, and we feel part of the body. And so I just covet you to help us with that. It's also why it's so important to be a part of a life group in a church like this, because in a life group, it's a smaller group, and everybody gets to know each other, and your life group members are under shepherds. They are people with, most of the time, pastors' hearts who are there to guide you and to care for you and to encourage you. Remember also that in God's kingdom, this side of heaven, there's no such thing as a perfect earthly shepherd or pastor, just as there's no such thing as perfect sheep. And the shepherding relationship is always lived out imperfectly, because earthly pastors and spiritual shepherds are, first of all, sheep themselves. And sheep are, in the end, weak and vulnerable and not always very bright. But remarkably, it is God's plan and desire as the gate of protection to give under-shepherds access to the sheep to provide for their protection. Here's another promise for us as God's sheep. Jesus said, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. So Jesus was making it clear that as the gate, he is the only way to be saved. And through him, we go in and out, and we find freedom, and we find security and nourishment. We find green pastures and still waters where all of our needs are met by him. And in contrast to the thief, who comes only to steal and kill and destroy, Jesus has come to give us a full life. The Message, which is a paraphrase of the Bible, puts it this way. He comes to give us more and better life than we've ever dreamed of. And the New International Version says, I want them to have a life in the fullest possible way. And the New American Standard says, I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Isn't that beautiful? I have an acquaintance. So Jesus is the gate of abundance. Okay? I have an old acquaintance of mine. His name is Craig McNair Wilson. And he's an actor and an author and a speaker who, I saw him one time do a very thought-provoking skit. And I can't remember it exactly, but I'm going to try to at least be faithful to his spirit, but I know not his talent, okay? So it went something like this. Oh, hi. A package. Holy cow. This is for us, huh? Holy cow. More abundance. I don't think, I didn't order more. I don't want to sign for this. I didn't order more abundance. My wife, maybe. Hold on, just let me call her real quick, okay? All right, thanks. Yeah, hi, honey. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to bother you. Yeah, hey, I know you're getting a pedicure. Yeah. I know you're going to get a massage and a facial. Yeah, I know. I know this is your me day. Yeah, I know, honey. And I know you're going to dinner with the ladies. You're going to plan your cruise. Yeah, I got all that. Honey, just take a second. Honey, there's a guy here with a package for us from UPS. The package has more abundance written all over it. It's addressed to us. It's from a Mr. Lord. You didn't order it either. Oh, no. Oh, okay. Sorry to bother you. Bye, sweetie. Okay. Yeah. She didn't order this either. And we don't need any more abundance. We got more abundance than you can imagine in our lives. I got 3 storage units. I don't even know what's in them. We got abundance coming out of our ears. A different kind of abundance? I don't know about a different kind of abundance. I'm not going to sign for this. No, I'm not signing for this. We didn't order it. I don't even know who Mr. Lord is. There. I said no. We know what's best for us. Good day. Now, most of us, when we think about the word abundance, what do we think of? Things? What else? Stuff? Possessions? What else? What? Excess? Money? Pleasure? Experiences? What? Our calendars, yes. But God never promised that kind of abundance to us. In fact, the good news of the gospel is not a prosperity gospel. I hope you know that. But Jesus does want to give us a rich and a satisfying life in this sense. He wants to lead us in safety and security to green pastures and fresh, still waters that are filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. And I can't tell you how it grieves our pastors' hearts when we are visiting with someone who's in so much pain, who's in so much despair. The tears are running down their faces when those kind of gifts of abundance are not present in their lives. Jesus wants to give us a life filled with more contentment, more direction, more purpose, more satisfaction, more meaning. And Jesus wants to give us that kind of a wonderful life filled with more and more of that kind of abundance. And Jesus promises to be the gate to that abundant life. Here's a third promise for God's sheep. Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Thousands of years ago, it was not always possible for a shepherd to lead his sheep to the shelter and to the refuge of a sheepfold in a town. And so sometimes what would happen, he would have to stay in the countryside overnight with his sheep. And so he would find a little ravine or a crevice, and he would gather whatever he could to create a little makeshift sheepfold, maybe some branches or some rocks. And he'd leave a little opening, and he'd lead the sheep in, and then he would lay down in the opening, and he would literally become the living gate protecting the sheep from robbers and predators. And anything or anyone would have to go through him to get to the sheep. And because he knew the sheep, because he called them by name, because he loved the sheep, he was willing to do anything to protect his flock, including laying down his life for them. And it was not uncommon, therefore, for a shepherd 2,000 years ago to lose his life to a predator, to a lion, or to a bear, or to a thief, or to a robber, while he was trying to protect his sheep. Jesus is the gate of sacrifice. Jesus is the gate of sacrifice. He is also the good shepherd who loves his sheep so much that he willingly laid down his life for you and for me so that we might be delivered from the enemy who seeks to destroy us, that we might become his forgiven lambs, that we might be gathered into his flock, that we might be given access to the safety and security of his sheepfold, that we might be led in and out to green pastures and still waters, that we might live securely in his keeping, and that we might be given a rich and a full life overflowing with the abundant blessings of his kingdom. And all of this was purchased by the sacrifice of his body and blood, so that we might be his own, be called by his name, so that we might recognize his voice. Just enjoy this.
One more time.
Oh, one is.
Louder!
Tika, 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 tika. Tika, 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 tika. Tika, tika. Tika, tika, tika. Ayoko.
Look at them, look at them.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
They are coming. Oh my God. This scared them.
Yeah, Eunice made him go away.
Oh my god.
Was that cool or what?
Yeah.
You will never have the same again.
Oh my god.